At Bethesda's latest E3 conference, Bethesda and its studios spoke about quite a few games they were working on, from the new Doom to Elder Scrolls Online updates, and even spent quite a bit of time on Fallout 76. What was likely apparent to any Arena FPS fan was the lack of mention of anything Quake related, despite that the game Quake Champions should be releasing sometime this year. In fact, QuakeCon is being renamed to
DoomCon.
And id even said that 2019 was the year of Doom. Considering 2019 was supposed to be the year Quake Champions would be fully released, I think it's pretty obvious that Bethesda doesn't really have much planned for the game or the series going forward. We've gotten to the point where Fallout 76, a game that not only sold far less than expected, but was a massive critical failure and became a laughingstock, is seen by Bethesda as a more worthwhile investment going forward than Quake Champions, a game from one of the most beloved FPS franchises of all time. Suffice to say, the gaming industry doesn't really care much for arena shooters in this day and age. But why is that? It could be argued that the first major multiplayer shooters were arena shooters. While I don't know if everyone will agree with my definition, I think most will agree that what separates Arena FPS from other genres of shooter is its speed, emphasis on controlling the map as a means to your resources, and equal starting stats between all players. This is what separates, say, Quake 3 and Unreal Tournament from other fast-paced shooters of the time like Natural Selection or Tribes. As far as multiplayer FPS were concerned during the 90s, Quake was the game to beat, and many developers tried to beat Quake by being like Quake. In my opinion, the series that did it best was the Unreal Tournament series by adding weapon variety, new modes, and later vehicles. As many of you likely know, it wasn't another Arena FPS that would eventually beat Quake's popularity, but a new type of shooter altogether. In many ways, and like I've said before in other videos, Halo really did change console gaming. With its clever control design, slowing down its gunplay, and adding regenerating armor, Halo managed to deviate from the arena shooter formula just enough to make it functional on consoles. And considering console gaming during the early 2000s were starting to devastate similar PC releases, it became clear that if you wanted to make an FPS, you were likely going to have to at least pay consoles, and specifically their controllers, some lip service when designing your games. It's a simple fact that with a controller, you really can't make the quick and precise shots necessary to be good at Arena FPS. So games like Quake were replaced by pseudo-arena shooters like Halo, which despite Halo's slower movement speed, actually still did retain a lot of arena shooter qualities. You still had to collect weapons throughout the map, and everyone began each round with an equal start. But the twitch skill required to play arena shooters were definitely no longer required. As time went on and Halo made way to other FPS, PC gaming in the background was becoming more and more popular. With the advent of Steam and the mass popularity of PC-only free-to-play games that would come in the 2010s, it seemed right to bring the Arena FPS out of retirement. At first, a few indie studios put their hat into the ring, but with the multiplayer space being far more competitive and without a real budget, most of these died pretty quickly. What the genre needed was releases from studios that could both advertise their game and foster its competitive community, and it seemed for a time that this would indeed happen. Epic Games, the studio behind Unreal Tournament, announced a new game in the franchise, and later, id Software would do the same for their series Quake. Sadly, things didn't really go well for either. For the new Unreal Tournament, it had a pretty nice start. It was going to be developed by a small core team of Epic Games staff, but also co-developed with the help of their online community. While development was slow, it seemed at first that the developers were making all the right decisions. They were listening to fans, and we began to see consistent updates. In the early days of development, in order to play the game, you had to find a random install in their forum and go through hoops just to get it working. Back then, and to this day, most of the maps were unfinished, and many gun models were still just using developer graphics. But despite its early state, and that the game's only way of spreading was through word of mouth, the game had a consistent and active player base. Sure, not millions of players, but you could always find active servers in any game mode in your area. What was most surprising was how active the community was in helping develop the game. Players would submit maps, models, in-game art, and even game modes. The developers and the community would coordinate and get these things put into the game. It was actually really special to see, and I have personally never seen anything like it from a AAA developer before or since. The closest I could think of would be the community-made cosmetics in Team Fortress 2, but in this case it was applied to every aspect of the game. As time went on, the pre-alpha period extended longer and longer as the main developers would constantly be put onto other projects temporarily. Despite this, community members still poured thousands of hours into making maps and game modes for the game, with the developers coming back, making some updates for a few months, and implementing what the community had made. But things stopped in 2017. The developers were going to take a quick 2-month break to develop a Battle Royale mode for what was then the failing game known as Fortnite. Things weren't really looking good for it, but they figured maybe adding a Battle Royale mode would help. The UT devs got to work and, almost out of thin air and some reused assets, constructed a Battle Royale mode out of the pieces of what was the original Fortnite. Not surprisingly, you can see a lot of the arena shooter philosophy in Fortnite. The game has no ability cooldowns, equal stat starts between rounds, aiming down sights isn't really required for most guns, and the game has an emphasis on open combat. As you certainly know, this little Fortnite game mode blew up in popularity, quickly becoming the most popular video game in the world. While this was great for Epic, this was a death sentence for Unreal Tournament. Before this, the developers used to give weekly updates of UT's development through Twitch, where they would play with and interact with fans while also giving praise to the works of the community. After Fortnite, the devs basically went completely silent. With a year passing without a single blog update, it was clear the game was abandoned by Epic. But the thing is, it wasn't abandoned by the community. Despite no official support, the community put in thousands of more hours into creating content for the purpose of it being put into the game. The saddest part of all of this is that without a single developer at Epic around to look over the content, none of it was officially implemented into Unreal Tourney. This is the part of the story that upsets me the most. All Epic really needed was to have a single person look over the content and implement it. If all the game got was that, the fanbase would have been able to finish the game themselves. Epic's total abandonment and silence to the fanbase is honestly one of the most disrespectful things I've seen a gaming company do to their fans. And it was heartbreaking considering at one point the developers and fans had a connection stronger than in any other game I'd seen. Epic didn't even have the courtesy of bothering to mention that they abandoned UT until over a year later when a journalist specifically asked someone at Epic about it, though by then it was already obvious to everyone that UT was dead. As for the latest Quake, in my opinion it didn't reach the same heights of UT, but neither did it reach the same lows. Quake Champions was announced at E3 2016. It had quite a bit of hype surrounding it because it seemed that Bethesda was going to put in some quality time and money making sure Quake would be successful. After all, Quake was the most well-known Arena FPS in history. But even at the time of its announcement, there were a few things getting people worried. The main thing being its champion system. For the most part, equal starts have been a core of arena shooters. The gameplay revolved around the assumption that all players had the exact same stats as you. In a way, it could be argued that Quake Champions, given its champions mechanic, might not even be an arena shooter. But that at most is an argument of semantics. The trouble the champion system brought to Quake were much bigger. Keep in mind that when Quake Champions was announced, Overwatch was the FPS to beat. By implementing a class and ability system, they thought they could ride what in retrospect would be a short-lived fad in shooters, that would later be swallowed by guess which genre and game. The result? The champion system was poorly implemented and poorly balanced. Examples include how the movement abilities trivialized the use of higher skill movements such as rocket jumping, how many skills were ways to give players cheap and easy kills, or how some skills were just outright broken. One example would be Doomslayer's Rip and Tear ability, which gives him enhanced movement speed and causes him to punch opponents. For starters, Doomguy's punch ability would semi-randomly cause you to leap forward, sometimes throwing you out of the map. But worse is how it makes the player near colorblind, meaning it will be difficult knowing if a healing ward is friendly or an enemy's, meaning it could either heal you or kill you if you walk into it. What was worst about the champion system, however, is how it took development time away from far more important things like game modes and optimization. When Quake Champions released in open beta, it pretty much only had deathmatch and team deathmatch as modes. Eventually, fans complained enough to get Capture the Flag in, but the damage was already done. You see, if you're new to arena shooters, the last mode you want to play is deathmatch. It's extremely intimidating because in it, new players get completely stomped by better ones. While the skill gap still exists in team objective modes, getting kills isn't as important, so even bad players can feel like they contributed in some way. This is why objective-based game modes have been popular in arena shooters for years, and why it's become a staple of more casual multiplayer games today. But what I think was what sealed Quake Champions' fate is its poor optimization. In all honesty, Quake Champions may be the most poorly optimized game I've played in years. It was, and still is, basically unplayable on most mid-range computers, and even many high-end computers had issues. The major one being horrible micro-stutters that would get you killed and make you rage. The engine also had hit detection issues, which is a huge issue for an arena shooter. It's thanks to all of these major issues that Quake Champions never really took off, and why Bethesda thinks Fallout 76 is a better investment opportunity than Quake. But in the end, neither Quake nor UT were likely ever going to get as huge as the IPs they were abandoned for. The sad fact is that arena shooters are likely never going to dominate the industry like they once did. But that should be okay. Publishers have to realize that not every game needs millions of active daily players to be successful. I think a good comparison would be fighting games. The fighting game genre has seen a huge resurgence over the last decade, despite the fact that very few of these games ever sell blockbusters. Street Fighter, the most well-known name in fighting games, only sells a few million copies each installment. Yet, that's enough for the publisher and the community. In fighting games, the publisher has a nice consistent fanbase, and as long as they cater to that fanbase, they can expect steady profits from a community that won't leave them. It's not like arena shooters need the budgets of games like Battlefield either. Instead of massive battlefields and campaigns, just a few maps and a few weapons is enough. After all, the last Unreal tournament was being made by a group of around 5 people. Yet, with basically no advertising, an annoying nearly hidden install button, and unfinished textures, the game was able to get a very dedicated player base during its pre-alpha days before it was abandoned. Even more impressive, the fanbase was dedicated enough to put thousands of man-hours into supporting the game they loved. Like the fighting game genre, which would have been dead long ago if it weren't for the community hosting fights and promoting their games. The arena shooter fanbase has shown that it can be just as dedicated. After all, many of these people still play Quake 3 and Quake Live to this day. While Quake Champions isn't in a very good state, I'm confident that if Bethesda and id took the right approach, they could turn things around. After all, many people were considering Counter-Strike Global Offensive a failure during its first few months of release. But thanks to Valve changing course and making the right decisions, that game is now one of the most popular on Steam. In the modern era of online games where most can't seem to last a year, isn't catering to a consistent fanbase a safer bet than trying and most likely failing to become the next Fortnite? With the explosion of esports and Twitch, I believe an arena shooter has more chances of doing well today than at any point in the last decade. All it really takes is a team with the backing to make the right game, to know what their fanbase wants while supporting their competitive scene, and to have realistic expectations of what they can expect in terms of player numbers. It's worked for other communities, and I know it can work here too. See ya.